This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I am your host, Jason Baum, and with me as always, Marcus Merrell and Evelyn Coleman. Thanks for joining us again, guys. And really excited because today we have a special guest. Joining us today is Hanson Ho. Hanson is an engineer with a healthy dose of paranoia regarding software under his purview working as expected in production. This was strengthened while he was at tech lead of Android performance and stability at Twitter, and he now brings that level of rigor to Embrace as his role as Android architect, helping to shape and implement a multifaceted strategy to maintain and improve quality before, during, and after each SDK release to ensure their customers can use their product to do the same on their end. And we are really excited to bring you on, Hanson, so that we could talk mobile. And we have not done that enough. We've actually had the feedback. We've had community feedback. Talk more about mobile. So we're excited to talk more about mobile. Actually, Marcus and I ran into the Embrace team at DroidCon in New York, and we hit it off. Really loved the team, and we were like, we got to do something from the community perspective. Let's do a podcast. So really excited that you could come on, Hanson, and talk with us.
Happy to be here.
Cool. So I guess right off the bat, we can ask a question with regards to test automation, why as a mobile dev should I care?
Well, you want your software to work in the wild, right? I mean, generally, software or mobile teams aren't terribly big, and we basically have to do everything on our own. We often don't have dedicated, folks doing testing, and those that do generally focus on more of the front end, ensuring the workflows actually work. When you are working towards the back end of the application, like doing, lower layer library stuff on the app, or you're on a small team with 3 developers, you got to make sure your stuff works because no one else will. So automation is it's not imposed. It's something you would want to have, because if you don't, how are you going to make sure your stuff works on phones from 7 years ago running OSs unpatched from 5 years ago in a network that is 2G, coming in and out of parking lots, and the RAM is not very good. So mobile gives you this extremely challenging environment to validate that things work all the time, and you don't have the resources to manually do that. So automation is the only way. I can't imagine shipping a mobile app that gets used by a significant number of people and not having some sort of automation. So, yeah.
That's a great answer. And you answered the question of why should they care? Why don't they care?
It's hard. Again, the small team and expertise, not having dedicated QA functions, and personnel means you don't have the expertise to even know what to test and how to test. Or you Google, testing software, and you get like a million different things. And it's like, should I write unit tests? Should I write, end-to-end functional tests? Should I do screenshot testing? So to figure that out takes time and experience. And, you're in mobile. You could patch. If you make a mistake and just run a manual test to make sure most of the functionalities work. It's cool. If you make a mistake, ship a new version. And if you're doing a game, it's just a glitch. And if you don't have a ton of users, it's totally fine. So, you get hit if you have an app that folks use, and you learn your lesson. But there are many, 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 many mobile shops out there shipping, libraries, SDKs, apps, games, some used by thousands of people only, some tens of thousands. So you get bitten, you'll do a better job testing. But if you don't, well, you keep going, and people get away with it because they can patch easily, and sometimes it doesn't bite them.
You mentioned that it's a skill that you have to learn. What would you say to engineers who kind of haven't picked up the habit yet? They've been in the sort of situation you just described. Is there a good return on investment if they prioritize automated testing as a skill and perhaps like do that on their down, like after time? I know you all wear so many hats. After work, take extra classes, listen to podcasts. Is there a good return on investment for that, would you say? Has there been in your career?
Yeah, but I wouldn't use downtime to do it. This is work time, because companies are they get the return when their developers focus on quality. So to spend the day learning how to, no, more than a day, spend some amount of time to actually probably know how to test with the various frameworks available on the platform and to set up automation, to actually run it at every commit. This will pay for itself, in tenfold, a hundredfold. So certainly there are many resources out there, podcasts being definitely one of them. Lots of blogs out there. Vendors will have kind of how-tos, and there are so many sources out there. I'm I struggle. I would struggle if I were getting into the space right now and trying to learn, just because there are you type in Google, which one should I trust? I think back when I was still reading books, I've been doing this for like almost 20 years. So, I used to buy books, on this stuff to learn. That was a great way. Probably there are different things to do now. I'm sure there are very good folks out there with blog posts and podcast series that you can learn from. But in terms of return on investment,
Y'all remember books?
Books. Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's fair to say in 2023, I think ChatGPT might be a pretty good answer. Like sometimes it can steer you in the wrong direction, but most of the time I'm going to go with 70-80%. That would be a one, at least one good place to start. But I do miss books.
yeah, back then there were fewer things to do, so you can sit down, read 500 pages of Code Complete or whatever. Um, you know, Now you can ask ChatGPT, and maybe it won't give you all the right answers, but it'll give you an answer pretty fast, and it may be pretty good if you're starting from zero. So
As you're talking, like I came from the ed tech world, in the DevOps space, and it's hearing you talk. It's like, yes, absolutely. Like we should be reading and we should be consuming and learning. And I talk to a lot of lifelong learners and people who believe in constantly upskilling themselves. But the problem now is I feel like I hear less about that because so many people are overwhelmed. And that's a product of what's happening in the market at the moment. And hopefully we're all like hoping that this is like over soon. This is a glitch. It's just a bump in the road. But we just put out this report called Developers Behaving Badly. And in that report, 77% of the developers who answered the survey said that they had new new things added to their plate that weren't there before in the past 12 months. And they're also like 67% of them were now pushing to prod without testing. And 61% were pushing code that was written by ChatGPT to prod without testing that, which is in some ways way more horrifying of a number. So everything you're saying, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Problem is, it's like these times. I don't know. Like we've got to say it louder, or if we say it differently, I don't know the right way to get this message out. Any thoughts there on what I was just kind of going on about past and present, but
well, I think my whole thing, because I don't come from a test background, I come from a dev background, so I test because it is very useful for me. It is a pragmatic choice for me to spend time doing this because otherwise I would be fixing bugs. I would be making dissatisfied customers. I would not be spending time writing features. I would be worried about refactoring if I need to change things. Because in the mobile world, especially, new libraries come up all the time, new versions come up all the time. How do you ensure when you upgrade a dependency that you don't break anything? You're not going to every time you upgrade a library, you run your battery manual tests on all the devices. You're going to spend your whole day running, tests manually. So I think developers need to understand that it's like studying for a test or doing things that may seem not the best use of time in the short term, but it pays off. Especially if you expect your code base to last. Now, if you're shipping something really fast, a prototype, or you're trying to demonstrate value very quickly, you make the trade-off of what, if it breaks, I will ship a new version to my beta customer or whatever. But if you have something in production that is expected to work, that every time you have a release and folks complain when certain things that used to work don't work, then you'll learn, and your management will learn and say, hey, why wasn't this tested? Why wasn't quality assured when I released this? And all you say, well, I don't have time. Well, look at all these automation tools. I mean, the last few years, especially, the frameworks have increased, exponentially in terms of functionality, ease of use, and reliability. Vendors allow you to run various tests on real devices in the cloud, so you can test different versions. Budget may be an issue, but if you're working in a place where you can spare the money, or you actually need to support all these customers on these devices, it's money well spent. So you don't have to buy a bunch of devices and manually trigger this stuff. So I'd say 5 years ago, 7 years ago, I would say the excuse of oh yeah, this is hard, so I'm just going to risk it. The cost benefit may work in the not test favor, but as it becomes easier to write tests and run tests, I think developers will start seeing the benefit. I think we're in the middle of a bit of a sea change in mobile, where the tooling is getting a lot better, and a lot of people are still focused on the older mindset of this is hard to do, or this is, and I think we're going to be seeing, especially with the layoffs and all the things that reduce capacity and then add more folks or more things to the plate of folks. Automation takes things off the plate for you. So I think we're in the middle of, we will see, I'm going to make a bold prediction that we will see this become better. If you do the same survey next year, in 2 years, I think because of the constraints of time, you're going to see people rely on things like test automation a lot more. As you see code from sources that may not be 100% trustworthy out there, that work for 90% of the cases, but don't work for 10% of the cases, you're going to see people think, oh yeah, we're gonna go back to testing a little bit more. So I think the numbers are going to be a lot better in a year and in 2 years, just because the value is there. I mean, go ahead, my competitors, the competitors embrace, please don't test any of your code. You're slowing yourself down. Just ship it, please. Please don't test.
All great points. I'm wondering if you, in your own history, what I find with a lot of people, testers included, is that at some point you go from maybe this is a thing I have to do to, oh, now I've seen the light. This is actually a defensive move I'm going to make preemptively to protect my future self from harm or from toil or boredom or bugs or anything like that. What was your epiphany moment? Was it one moment? Was it serious things? How did that story evolve for you?
I'm a bit of a perfectionist, which is actually not a good thing, because priorities sometimes are difficult if I am left alone to set my own priorities. So for me, finding that balance of, oh yeah, I need to make sure I test instead of or rather automated tests rather than just manual tests. The epiphany, I wouldn't say there's an epiphany, but it's a slow build. As you see customers and internal customers, external customers run into issues in your code, and you're like, oh, I should have caught that. And yet, especially when I was younger, it's like, yeah, I can do this. You realize you can't. You realize that you think you can, but you can't. And as you see folks give you things that you should have caught, you want to find things to do to catch them before you do it. And spending time exhaustively testing manually is just not the way, especially when your responsibilities grow and you have more things that you're responsible for. So I think it slowly built up to a point where it wasn't obvious and it became obvious. Like, oh my, using a computer to help me do stuff faster,
Yeah.
wow, what a revelation.
So when you're starting out like a new project or advising someone who hasn't doesn't have any tests in their project, do you kind of advise a strategy around the like traditional test automation pyramid, if you're familiar with that, or do you talk about unit testing, API testing, UI testing? Like, are they separate to you? How do you approach advising people to build that suite out?
So traditionally, devs really focus on unit tests because they've read a book or people tell them. They say test
Yeah.
the unit, make sure the inputs and the outputs are guaranteed, and if you connect all these units together, they're going to work.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you do it in
Good
practice.
start.
You're like, hey, my unit tests are so good, but then they don't work when you can connect 5 different components together. So I think the first thing, you approach developers on testing, they'll be like, yeah, unit tests are useless because, I've done all this unit tests, my software still breaks. And you'll realize, you look at the unit tests and they're like mocking all these things. And they're like, you're not actually testing your unit, you're testing your mocks. So first getting them to like understand the utility of unit tests and how to do it properly, that's one aspect. And then also introducing them to other tests like integration tests, functional tests, end-to-end tests. The closer you are to validating the software as the customers use it, the better it is. Now, having UI tests and having test drivers that go through the UI, those are difficult to maintain sometimes. It's costly to maintain. So as a developer, you're like, I don't want to spend my time doing that. But the unit tests are useless. So what do I do? Well, there's other things besides the UI driven tests, screenshot tests, gold file tests, and unit tests. There's the integration tests. There's the component tests where you connect components together. You have larger subsystems and you test them. And I think getting folks to understand the value of doing tests that are similar to unit tests and then them actually catching issues when you refactor a component, I think that's when they see it. That's when they see it. It's like, oh, I just made a change. I'm related to this. And hey, an integration test broke. Oh, you could have this value, which then becomes this other value in this component. That's when they go, oh yeah. So you can't tell them. You almost have to show them. That's been my experience. Is they don't see it until they see it. Like see it.
Right.
So
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you want to test the thing at the lowest level where they can actually make a quantitative statement about the thing that they're testing, right? To your point about testing mocks, that is hilarious. I feel like there should be some sort of linter that can detect when that's happening, because it's not that hard to figure out when you're just testing the mock. Anyway, I wanted to ask the next thing, like from like digging down a little bit from the strategy more to the tactics. When you build automated testing, usually there is this big question about, do you design the automation in the same language as the application, or do you design it in the same language as the people who are going to be developing and implementing the tests are the best at? And the reason this has really become interesting now is because finally we have a really rich top to bottom level set of tools available for mobile. So you've got XCUI test in Swift, you got Espresso in Kotlin. Do you encourage people to stick with these things, or use something more like Appium? How do you tend to approach these?
it depends. It's a bit of a cop out, but it's also true. I would prefer.
Absolutely true.
It's horses for courses. That's a Britishism. Sometimes you want to have the integration tests at the higher level, you want Appium or whatever. Sometimes you want, something in the middle. And sometimes you just want to use the language that the developers writing the code is familiar with. So I think if they're writing Android, building tests in Kotlin would be ideal. But if they have, say, a shared framework between different OSs or libraries that are used elsewhere, and they want to test at a lower level, or native binaries, for instance, C++ or something like that, then it makes sense to test there. I mean, happy path, like I would test on the language that is most popular in the platform, just because you're going to be able to get as much help from the community, and you'll also be, you're not struggling with the language, which is, sometimes it's easy to learn a new language, but if you don't have to, that's also easy. It's easy not to have to pick up another language just for testing.
It feels like every year, every 3-4 years, JavaScript is also already a new language because all of the libraries are different and turned over and new, and you have to relearn, like, oh, some of the syntax is the same, but the thought process is always evolving. But on a slightly different note, you mentioned screenshot testing. Where does screenshot testing fit into mobile testing and development?
So I know Android, folks use Paparazzi, as a popular library, for instance, for screenshot testing. It's similar to gold file testing in the API, where you're like, I want to be assured that the final results that I get is exactly this, whether it's pixel perfection due to theming, whether it's some components that load that are styled differently depending on the device or the OS version. Sometimes the easiest thing to verify is just literally the screenshot. So screenshot testing, when done properly, is great at verifying that, hey, all these components, I'm using Compose version, the latest Compose version on the latest Android version on a new phone. Is it still looking the same if I upgrade, the Kotlin version or the Compose version or something like that? And screenshot testing allows you to basically say, yeah, nothing has changed visually. Now, of course, underneath, lots of things can change. But similar to gold file testing, sometimes all you care about is the end result. And I think screenshot testing is fantastic for that type of thing. So you can verify that things render properly on different form factors, on different OSs, on different dependencies. So it's a great way to make sure that when you ship a version, it doesn't break on your beta release because, and your dog food release because, folks using the latest phones totally work fine. When somebody pulls up like a KitKat device that has like a 3.5-inch screen, the new library version made the font a little bit bigger, so my text box got a little bit bigger, so my button got pushed out or partially obscured. And unless you're testing for that specific scenario, screenshot testing, run it, take a screenshot. Oh yeah, cool. That will catch it. So it's great for that. But just like gold file testing, maintaining it is I made a change. I got to change these 15 different screenshots. There's automated ways of doing it, I'm sure, but it's just another area where you need to figure out if it's useful for you, if it's the cost benefit is beneficial for you. But if it is, fantastic tool.
That makes sense. Is there anything from your background that makes Android testing specifically unique compared to iOS or web testing? What kind of challenges are posed in Android that aren't posed other places?
I think with Android, you have similar challenges on mobile, for iOS as well. I think the thing that makes Android unique is that we have a lot of different phone manufacturers, we have a lot of different OS versions, and we have a lot of different phones that are of varying ages. Folks using 10-year-old phones. Android is the platform for the masses. You can get an Android device for $50. Good luck getting an anything for $50. You might get the cloth or something, the iCloth, but not a device. And because of these devices that are still popular outside, fancy circles, people buying the latest phones. You have folks who are giving it to their grandparents because they didn't use it. Those phones last a long time. And making sure that it doesn't break for those types of devices, that's the hard part. If all you care about is the latest versions, latest releases, latest phones, it's easy. Android has literally thousands of models out there that are supported, even in the latest versions. So making sure, especially depending on what your app is, if your app is targeted towards a more general audience, not a tech-savvy audience, you're going to have to support that Moto G4 from 8 years ago. with a gig of RAM. So unless you don't care about them as a customer, but I think certainly a lot of people care about, folks with those types of phones. So that is particularly challenging, especially when you talk about performance, which is kind of my bag. Sometimes functional testing, oh yeah, it works. What does work mean? Work means the test passes. What if it takes 30 seconds for the thing to load because your phone is bad, your network is bad? And how do you handle those types of conditions? Android doesn't, it's not unique to Android, but Android has a bigger problem simply because there is a lot of older hardware running on random devices out there. And that's the main challenge of Android.
That's awesome. I mean, it's challenging, but it's awesome
challenging.
that anyone would have the skill set to be able to overcome that.
I mean, that's what automation is there for you, because in not doing any sort of manual testing to verify, impossible or very impractical, I should say.
How many devices are there that Android like?
All of them.
Does anyone know the
Thousands.
answer to that question?
Yeah, tens of thousands.
Wow.
Back in Twitter, we have device models. So it's something that we know that sometimes bugs are caused by specific vendors with different OEMs with different software configurations and different versions. And so we know what the models are. And you do a distinct model and you get tens of thousands, thousands at least, with various usage. And most of them are similar, especially with the newer versions of Android. They do a much better job with the newer version of Android, to make sure that it runs similarly on various hardware devices and things like that, form factors. We're still dealing with Android 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and those are from a long time ago. And unless you don't care about them, again, you can always say, I only support API 29 plus or something like that. You cut yourself off from a lot of people.
I think you can get away with that sometimes, maybe with games and stuff where people are used to being told what platform they have to have in order to run something. But if it's just like a regular app that somebody needs to use or is being even forced to use, if it's like an internal app or something, you can't get away with that.
Oh yeah, like insurance companies, banks. You're not going to change your bank because the app doesn't work well on your phone, so you just don't use it. So when performance impacts devices and you don't test for it, you don't see that unless you see your metrics. You see older phones drop away, and you might think, oh yeah, it's just people upgrading. No, your performance is crap. I can't use it anymore. There's a minimum threshold. It's like you must be this high to ride. So even if it's functionally working on an older device, if it's too slow, people give up. People say, nah, I ain't using this. I'll just use the website, or I'll ask my kid to do it. Whatever it is. So you get folks losing it. And maybe if you're a large bank, it doesn't matter because you're going to get their business anyway. But if you're a game, I'm just not going to play your game. I'm going to play some other game. So performance and testing performance, with CI to pick up regressions for these older devices is crucial to maintaining, overall usability. So picking up that kind of stuff, that's what automation is good for. It's for things that you don't think you need to test, but you actually do. And performance and stability is, as much as functionality is ripe for automation to help improve.
What makes shipping mobile SDKs like so challenging when it comes to maintaining quality?
So it's you go from Android, iOS to Android. You have an increased number of different factors, devices, things like that. You go from an app to an SDK. You have the challenge of unpredictable runtime environment. So at least with an app, you know exactly what your dependencies are and the versions are. If you're running, you're shipping an SDK, and the app is bundled with a dependency version that is older or newer, well, that's another kind of code path that you've not explicitly tested for. So the challenge there is how do you, again, maintain quality, ensure quality in the space where you don't even know what your app or your library is running in the context of. So maybe you have parameters that say, hey, it works under these conditions. Well, sometimes vendors will be like, or not vendors, the customers will be like, well, I need to use it in a slightly different way. So I'm going to use it in a way that's not 100% the best. They come back to you and say, hey, this isn't working. We'll point to the docs and say, hey, we don't recommend. And say, I don't care. I'm paying you money. So our customers don't do that. Our customers are fantastic. This is in theory, if somebody could do that. And you are stuck. You're like, I don't intend it to work like this. So so testing at least gives you an idea of roughly where it's going to break, so that when folks do that, you can, or folks come to you and say, hey, I want to do it this way. Is it going to be problematic? And you have tests and you're like, oh yeah, we will support up to, X amount of, whatever the scale is. And again, it makes it impossible to run automated tests on real devices, on real apps. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, run it on 10 different apps that use 10 different ways? You just can't predict how it's used. You can use it. Like apps, at least you can say, oh yeah, the workflow to upload a file is you click this button and you could roughly map it out. Here's an SDK. Here's a bunch of methods that help you track various functionality. We can capture ANRs, in a unique way to give you, not only the point of ANRs, but like flame graphs of what you're spending time on. Well, how are folks going to use it? So you can't fully test it. So you do your best. You get the highest value, bang for the buck, and then you basically have telemetry that comes back in production to tell you, oh yeah, there are these edge cases that your tests haven't covered. So with the mobile SDKs, you do your best, and just because of, again, the multiplicative scenarios, it makes it hard. But you also use Sauce Labs to make sure you have performance tests running to make sure you have wider coverage.
There you go. So Hanson, thank you so much for hopping on and talking to us about mobile test automation and what you do over at Embrace. And we're so aligned, I feel like, on so many things. It's interesting, but the more we could do to get the word out to mobile devs that testing is important, testing often is important, testing early is important. Hopefully the quality of the software that we are seeing begins to improve. And people wake up that unit testing isn't the only thing that you you do. And yeah, we really appreciate your time and hopping on here to talk to us today.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's fun talking about this. I feel like I'm not ranting just at myself or my team when I do this.
Is that what you sit there with a microphone and just are ranting when you're not on camera?
Oh yeah. I'll open Notion. I'll be, here's my manifesto, my testing manifesto. It's not only a trophy, it's a cabinet. You need all sorts of,
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Hanson. And thank you for listening. Thank you for giving us your time, the most valuable thing you could possibly give. And hope you had as much fun as we did, although I doubt it. We will see you next time on Test Case Scenario. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.